Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 213 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is Shining Knight, an interview with Brett Knight. My name is Richard Johannesson.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
Matt, this is a young woman who became a shining knight in our community by overcoming a number of really difficult challenges, both in her early childhood and then later on in her early adult life.
Rich, Brett went through a lot in her Lyme journey. She was called the crazy one by her friends and family, yet she continued to lean on her intuition and fight to find out what was really going on with her. Once she got her Lyme diagnosis, she treated with a wide variety of protocols like NAD, thymus therapy, stem cells, and even Venom Therapy. Some of these therapies actually made her feel worse. Others actually helped her feel better temporarily, and others were long-term solutions.
So, Matt, we're calling this young woman a shining knight in our community because she is a wonderful example of resilience. And she's also someone who just would not allow anyone, including her own family, to keep her down. So, Matt, without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce Brett Knight, our shining knight, to the Tick Bootcamp community. Hey, Brett, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We're really excited to have you, Brett. We've been waiting a long time to get you on the podcast, and we finally have you here. And I know our folks cannot see you, but you look wonderful with your really cool hat on, and we're really excited to go forward with this podcast. So, Brett, can you share with us and our listeners where you are calling in from?
I am residing in sunny California. I live in San Clemente. I have lived here for 7.5, 8 years, and it's a beautiful day outside. So I am just ready to share my journey with you guys.
All right, and we're really excited to have you share your journey with us. So Brett, talk to us a little bit about your life. And I understand you're a young mom, so talk to us about that experience.
I am. I'm 26 years old. I'll be 27 next month, and I have a son who is 2.5.
Congratulations.
Thank you. He's so full of life. He's taught me a lot. Having Lyme disease, and being a mom has really taught me a lot. And so I'm really excited to kind of share that part of my life. And, being a mom, trying to fight, illness and conquering it and working past all these hard things.
So, Brett, talk to us about where you grew up. What was your childhood like?
My childhood, my parents were very young. My parents are still young. I have a 30-year-old sister, and my parents are under 50. So they had my sister, my mom was 16, and she had me when she was 20. And, I grew up really active. We were a very active family. We loved camping. I grew up going to Yosemite every year. I grew up at the beach, and my parents didn't have a lot of money, so they really utilized the beach and camping and these activities to make our life fun. But I also did have a lot of trauma growing up. My parents fought a lot, as they were dealing with 2 young children, and they were young themselves and growing up. So I dealt with a lot of fighting and anxiety and anger, and a lot of these things that I saw growing up were really hard growing up as a young girl. Now I can share this, and I have an amazing relationship with my family, so I'm sure they don't mind sharing some of these harder things. But overall, I had a good childhood, and they taught me a lot to have perseverance and work through some hard things, because my parents definitely, being such young parents and being married so young, set a really good example.
So talk to us about what your educational experience was like. Where did you go to school, and what types of courses were you taking during your youth? And specifically, I'd like you to focus on any health courses or science courses that you had taken.
I have always been drawn to health, I would say. My mom, growing up, we weren't allowed to eat cereal because she thought it was bad. And
she was right?
Yeah, she was right. We weren't allowed to have soda and junk food, and not having a lot of money. A lot of our diet, consisted of vegetables, beans, rice, you know, some kind of protein. And my mom was an amazing cook. So I have always been drawn to food. I'm a big foodie and a cook myself. And it was awesome because she was such an example in that, in, you know, making these delicious foods that a lot of my friends, I would say, didn't grow up with. My mom was very adamant about having dinner every night together as a family. So every night we had dinner together, and food was, you know, a big communal thing for us. And so while I was in school, school was always really hard for me. I excelled, but it was a lot. I feel like as I was growing up, you know, they see this young blonde girl, and I was a towhead when I was younger. And I've always kind of felt like my whole entire life, because of how I look, I have been treated differently. And people always thought I had this amazing life and such an easy life, and I didn't deal with anything. And yet I grew up with a lot of trauma. And so in school, people, you know, could be really mean to me. And so I really drew on certain subjects. I loved history. I loved art. Art was definitely a form of, you know, letting myself go. And even though I wasn't very good at it, I just really enjoyed it. And so art was obviously a big one. Sports were always really big. I loved playing sports. I was always the girl that was playing football with all the guys, because I just loved like that competitive aspect. But as I got older, math was really hard for me. Math and science were always really, really difficult. And by the age of 12 or 13, I had been to, let's see here, maybe 10 different schools or 8. What is that? If I was in 6th grade, yeah, I think I want to say like 8 to 10 different schools. We moved a lot as a family. Like I said, my parents struggled financially a lot. So I think the longest I was in one school was 3 years. And other than that, every year was new teachers, new friends. And as I got older, I just started to struggle more and more with staying grounded and just sitting in a class all day. I really wanted to explore. And my biggest thing was I just felt like there was more to do than just sitting at a desk. I wanted to work. I wanted to be in the real world. And so as I got older, I actually went on homeschool, and it really allowed me creatively to kind of focus on what I was good at. And I was allowed to take like home ed classes, cooking classes. I surfed a lot. I was at the beach almost every single day. And I really just kind of grew this passion of what I wanted to do when I was older, which was I knew I wanted to be somewhat in health industry. So yeah, that's kind of how my schooling was.
So you had this outdoorsy life. Your parents had taken you to the beach often, had taken you to different camping locations, and you had this draw towards health. During any of the educational opportunities that you had, either through your parents, through social activities, or through school, did you learn anything about ticks and tick diseases?
Nothing. I had not even heard of Lyme disease till I was much older. I wasn't familiar with ticks at all. How to protect yourself, what to look out for, signs and symptoms. It wasn't even on my radar.
So you didn't know anything about them. So you were not taking any steps when you were camping, or you were going to the beach, or you were participating in any outdoor activities to determine whether or not you had any ticks.
Yeah.
All right, so talk to us about what your vision was for yourself. You started to hint that you had this draw towards the to the health community professionally. So how is that presenting to you during your childhood?
It started with when I was in high school, I started taking cooking classes. So part of my cooking class in homeschool was making different recipes every week and having the family eat them. And during this time, I really just took an interest in this. And so my mom just really let me kind of go for it. I had some bad meals, but I would say a lot of them are really good. And I drew off kind of what my mom would do and things I felt was missing in her cooking. And I kind of just came up with my own way of cooking. And during this time, I thought, I kind of started doing my own research. So I was getting older. I was in high school and I started taking a kinesiology class in college. And when I took that kinesiology class, it really kind of just opened the door for me. And even though I decided not to further my education in that, it really just kind of got my wheels spinning on really what I was passionate about. And what I was passionate about was health and wellness, fitness, being outdoors. And I knew that the emotional aspect was such a big deal. But at this time, I was very young still, and I didn't come to realize how much of my childhood had affected me. But I knew in my core, even when I was younger, that something wasn't quite right. And I always had like this deep longing for understanding those deeper feelings that I was going through.
So Brett, talk to us about when the symptoms that you now know to be your Lyme disease symptoms first began to present.
I would say, if I'm being totally honest, I really feel like a lot of my childhood, I dealt with some symptoms. I would have a lot of energy and then I'd kind of crash. I always had a hard time waking up in the mornings. I had a lot of anxiety, depression, my mind constantly racing. I just was having those symptoms. So as I got older, it progressively got worse. And when I had tried talking to my mom about it, she just said, "You're just emotional. I think you're just, a little depressed." And I just felt like what was happening inside me was just not normal. And it wasn't until I was 17 and I graduated early, and I was going on my graduation trip to Bali. And I decided to get a 3-in-1 traveler's vaccine. And I hadn't done a ton of research, but I was going to be there for at least a month surfing and eating all the food and all that. So I got this 3-in-1 vaccine. And right there was kind of my turning point.
Well, let's pause there for a second, Brett. What were the 3 vaccines that you had taken in this 3-in-1 vaccine?
I was trying to remember, and I should have looked it up before this, but I know one of them was typhoid fever, possibly MMR, and I can't remember what the third one was. I'd have to go back to my records and see.
Okay. So you're feeling symptomatic for most of your life. You have a lot of these symptoms that you now know to be classic Lyme disease symptoms, but you don't know that, right? You're 17 years old. You're going to take your senior trip, and you take this vaccine, and I'm assuming you crash. So talk to us about the crash.
I crashed. I got the vaccine, and obviously I hadn't had childhood vaccines for a very long time because I had at this point been in homeschool and charter schools and kind of moved around, and I hadn't had them since I was a lot younger. And I like to call it, it's kind of a perfect storm. I was dealing with increased stress as I was naturally getting older, starting to think about jobs, starting to think about my life. And I get this vaccine, and immediately my arm swells up, just swells up. It's super tender, and it's like that for an entire week. And I thought, man, this is kind of weird. The lady had told me, "Oh yeah, you might be a little sore for the rest of the day." And I was sore for at least a week. And I go to Bali, and as I'm there, I'm just getting increasingly exhausted. I'm tired. I'm having ringing in my ears. I can't sleep. all of a sudden I develop severe insomnia. And then of course, insomnia adds stress because then you're wondering why you're not sleeping. And I started drinking coffee because I'm like, wow, I can't even function. I am so exhausted. And here I am with my sister and her husband, and I'm on this amazing trip. And I was just so tired. I remember just laying there at night and feeling like something is wrong with me. I just feel like something is wrong with me.
So talk to us about how things developed and when you first started seeing doctors for these symptoms that you had been suffering for most of your life, but are now really troubling after your vaccination.
So I get this vaccination, I go to Bali, I come home, and ever since I had gotten that vaccination, everything started to spiral. It started with ringing in the ears, the pain in the arm, then it moved to insomnia, fatigue, and the list just goes on. I started having back problems. I had never had back problems, any kind of back problems in my entire life. My sister had dealt with some back problems, and she'd always kind of be like, oh, my back hurts. She'd go get adjusted and she was fine. And so I just started, these pains in my body kind of were coming out of nowhere. But again, it was almost like ever so slight. It wasn't all of a sudden I couldn't function. It was just over time, these weird symptoms started to occur.
And they were migrating.
And they were migrating. They started to migrate, and it started to become where it was, a couple times a week to it was like every day I was noticing these symptoms getting worse. And it wasn't until I was getting ready to be in one of my best friend at the time's wedding. And I'm 17, one of my best friends is getting married, and I was dating my soon to be, husband at this time. We were dating, and it was really stressful. And I was just helping with her with a lot of things. And I remember walking down at her wedding, and I had this crazy fever. I was extremely inflamed. I felt very sick. And I just thought, I have this flu. I don't know what's going on. And the very next day, I flew to Hawaii with my husband and his family, which was a first trip for us as a dating couple. Well, the same day that we land, he proposes to me, and I'm 17. He had asked for my parents' permission, and he proposes. And I was so happy and ecstatic. And immediately the next day, I go to put my bathing suit on, and I can barely lift my arms. And I'm thinking, man, this is such a weird virus. I still have this flu that's going on. My throat felt like there was razors in it. I ended up having to go to the hospital on that trip. I thought I had strep throat. They swabbed me. Nope, you're fine. You must just have a virus. I was hiking, and I was an avid exercise. I exercised all the time. I was very active. I have hiked Half Dome. I used to run 45 miles a day. And I'm walking up this slanted hill, and I'm out of breath. I'm thinking in my head, this is so strange. I don't have a stuffy nose, but I feel like I have the flu. And one of these dinners I'm supposed to go to with my new in-laws, I couldn't go. I couldn't get out of bed. And I remember calling my mom, and I was in tears, and I'm sitting in the bathtub all by myself, none of my family around. And I'm calling her, and I'm just bawling because I said, something's wrong with me. I can't move. And she's like, I think you just have a bad virus. It's just settling in your muscles. Just to try to enjoy your trip, and we'll figure it out when we get home.
So,
I come home.
Let me ask you to pause there for a second, because I'm trying to deconstruct this in my mind. So I'm getting the sense that you thought that you perhaps had Lyme disease before this trip to Hawaii, or not? Do you think you did have Lyme before you went to Hawaii, or was it at the trip where you believe that you were infected with Lyme or reinfected with Lyme?
I either was reinfected or I had already had it. But in my heart, I truly believe I got Lyme earlier in life. And I think because my stresses were a lot less. It was more dormant. And it wasn't until I started to process my own traumas from growing up, and I was getting married at a very young age, and I was working, and then I go and get this vaccine. And I think that was kind of the cherry on top. And I think what really just exploded it was stress.
So, Brett, it seems like you had a number of immune disrupting events, and each time you had an immune disrupting event, you had now either a relapse or you had some kind of a medical event. So the first immune disrupting event, of course, was that you received the vaccination, the 3-in-1 vaccination. And we've had many folks that we've interviewed in the past that have gotten sick after a vaccination. But after the vaccination, you then engage in some air travel, and air travel is also immune disrupting. You got through that. You seem to be okay. Now, between the trip that you took for your graduation and the trip that you're now taking with your then fiance's family, did you see any doctors?
I hadn't, not yet. I was really just managing with diet and exercise, because again, I was aware something was going on, but it would kind of come and go. And it wasn't bad enough at this point for me to trigger that something's seriously wrong.
So you were very healthy, right? You were eating well, you were exercising, you were just very healthy, and your body is managing this challenge. And now you have another immune disrupting event. You take a trip to Hawaii with your fiance's family. You didn't even know he was going to be your fiance. He asks you to marry him, and now you have another crash. You go to see a doctor while you're on one of the islands in Hawaii.
Yep.
And you're told there's nothing wrong with you, and you're just sort of managing this. And so how does it progress? I mean, does it get worse while you're on the trip, or?
It gets worse. My symptoms just kind of gradually started getting worse. I started getting a head cold, fatigue, body aches, and I ended up flying home after the trip a couple days later. And it went from this fatigue to extremely debilitating. I went to work and I had to call my grandma and my mom to come pick me up because I could not walk. I physically could not lift my legs. It just sat into me, and like this crazy thing took over my body. And where I was working at the time, it was a spa, and in the same little district community, there was a kinesiologist, and who was a chiropractor kinesiologist. And I kind of started doing a little bit of research, and I thought, maybe my back's just out, or maybe something's off. So my grandma and my mom come over, they're holding my shoulders. I'm walking over, and he does some little tests on me, and he goes, "Oh yes, you're very inflamed. There's something going on. I want to see you 3 times a week. I want you to start coming in. Let's get you adjusted." So I got my first adjustment. He goes, "Come back next week." Okay. Well, within those couple of days, my pain went from different body parts and the not being able to move. So it was in my legs, and then it traveled up to my arms. And I went to go tie my bathing suit to get in the jacuzzi, and I physically could not tie my bathing suit.
So Brett, let's pause there for a second. So you talked about migrating pains in the early part of your journey after or I guess during the high school trip. Now you're having migrating pains again, right? How are the migrating pains differently, and how are you emotionally responding to having all of these different pains at different times in different places?
When my first started pains kind of started, they weren't as severe. I'd kind of feel some pain in my back, and they would kind of come and go. And with this after this trip, it was very significant. It was so painful. It was as if my bones and muscles were completely locked, which I had not experienced before. It was very scary. I was so young, and I knew something was seriously wrong because I had never experienced something this severe in my life.
So now, I understand from our conversation earlier that you weren't diagnosed with Lyme disease until you were 20 years old. So give us the development of your symptoms between this period in your life when you're 17 to when you ultimately get your diagnosis at 20, and how your symptoms were getting worse and worse.
Over that period, my symptoms got more and more severe. So after the not being able to put my clothes on, tying my bathing suit, putting shoes on, after about 3 weeks of that, I had to take a medical leave at work for a month. I finally got in to see this blood specialist. He was a doctor, and we did lots of blood work. Lots and lots of blood work. He realized I was having some thyroid issues. I was on, almost had Graves' disease. I was borderline Graves' disease. I was losing muscle mass because I was so ill I couldn't move. And it was very hard to exercise at this point. I was exhausted. So over this course of time to when I was 20, all these symptoms kept getting worse. But this doctor that I was seeing, even though he did some really in-depth testing, more so than most of the doctors I've actually still seen till this day, he never tested me for Lyme. And I had never even, again, not even crossed my mind. I was not aware what Lyme disease was. And it wasn't until one of the first times I had heard of it was from one of my best friends. She's older than I am, but it's actually my husband's cousin. And she has Lyme disease. And I had been dealing with these issues and trying to get answers. And I had seen her at a family gathering, and she goes, she starts telling me about some of these symptoms that she's always had. And she goes, "Oh yeah, I have Lyme disease." She's like, "Have you ever considered that you have Lyme disease?" I go, "What? No. I mean, I wasn't bit by a tick. I don't think so. I don't know." But from that point on, she kind of put this little bug in my head. And
so let's pause there for a second. Now, when you're having this conversation with your good friend, your husband's cousin, and she's telling you she has Lyme disease and she's describing her symptoms, did you see any similarity in the symptoms that you were dealing with? And if you did, why were you so troubled about the possibility of having Lyme disease?
Yes, I did. I go, wow, so many of these symptoms were so similar, but something in me was scared. I was scared because I had heard of my husband's family talking about one of my, my best friend's now illness and how she had dealt with so much and her entire life. And I didn't want to go to that place. I thought maybe I was just dealing with something autoimmune, possibly. I thought maybe it was induced from, some childhood trauma or emotions I hadn't dealt with. And it wasn't until, I think from that conversation, I think I was about 18, 19, and it wasn't until like a year and a half, 2 years later that I was actually diagnosed with Lyme.
Okay, so let's pause there for another second. So you have somebody who has Lyme disease diagnosing you with Lyme disease because she sees the identity of your symptoms. You agree that there's an identity of symptoms, but there's some part of you that's afraid to get that diagnosis and would prefer even to have an autoimmune disease diagnosed rather than Lyme disease. Did you, during that window of time between when you had this conversation and you finally get your diagnosis, did you see any doctors and did you ask any doctors to test you for Lyme disease?
No, and I didn't, because when I had talked to her, she had told me I have gotten many negative blood tests. And at this point, I had spent so much with this other doctor that I was seeing that I thought, I'm not going to do this test. What if it comes back negative and then it's inconclusive? So it was scary to me in the fact that I didn't want to be wrongly diagnosed, whether I had it or didn't have it.
Or Brett, did you not want to be diagnosed and your mind allowed you to hold on to something like, hey, these tests don't work they don't give a diagnosis, or, hey, I spent a lot of money. I mean, was your mind taken to a place where you really wanted to be? And that was to have something other than a Lyme disease diagnosis.
Yeah. I was hoping I didn't have Lyme, because from what I had heard from her experience, I did not want to deal with that. And I was definitely in denial.
So talk to us about what that next year and a half was like. I mean, you're getting increasingly sick. These symptoms are developing. You have this potential diagnosis in the back of your mind. I mean, what are you doing for the next year and a half as you're getting sick, and how are you dealing with your Lyme denial?
Increasingly getting worse and worse. And in this time, my marriage was getting harder and harder, because both my husband and I were trying to figure out what is going on. I was on paper doing everything right. I was eating extremely healthy. I was trying to move as best I could, go on walks. I ended up working less. I was already working part-time. I went down in another day of work. And I finally one day sat on my couch and I was bawling to my husband. And I just said, something is seriously wrong with me. I went from having these issues and these aches and pains and weird things and this insomnia, but I could still function, to where I could not function. I could not physically clean my house anymore. And I was so young. I just knew something is not right. Just something is, I'm like very seriously sick.
Okay, so let's pause there again. So you're a year and a half into living this life where you're getting increasingly sick, and you go from being this uber fit young woman who is living a healthy life and intuitively making changes in her life so that she can manage this disease. And then you really crash. You can't even clean your house. You can't work. You're just crashing. Does the Lyme disease, or the potential of Lyme disease, finally come to the front of your brain? Are you finally able to deny or stop the mind denial of Lyme disease and now ask a doctor for a Lyme disease test?
Yes, but still, I was so terrified of going to another MD and that test being negative. And so this is kind of the turning point when my husband's family knew this doctor from Germany. They're really good friends with him. And he was, what I know now is, at the time, he was a Lyme specialist in Germany. And his family was telling me about this machine. They go, he has this biofeedback machine. It's this very special machine. It scans your whole body. It tells you what's going on. And it's extremely accurate. And they're begging me to come up to their house, and he's going to be in town. Just let him do the scan on you. And I go, okay, fine. At this point, I'm so sick that I felt like I couldn't go on any longer. I just was so sick. I was so tired. And I go, what bad can come out of it? So I meet with this doctor in their house, and I go upstairs, and I'm in this room, and he doesn't ask me any questions. He goes, I don't want to hear any of your symptoms. Let's see what the scan says. He goes, you can't talk for 20 minutes. And I go, okay. I'm sitting there waiting, it's downloading. I'm holding this little gadget in my hand, and he comes back in, and he starts going over my result. Do you have any issues in your right knee? I go, yeah, I always have. I always have had these issues ever since I started running. Okay. He goes, what's going on with your digestion? Do you have this pain? How does this feel? And I go, yeah, I've had that. I've had that for quite some time. And he reads me a couple more symptoms that were very specific. And he goes, well, I know why you're so sick. He goes, you have chronic Lyme disease. And I go, what? He goes, your scan is just everything is popping up that you have Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Lyme disease, co-infections. He's like, you're at like stage 4. He's like, you are extremely sick. And I just start bawling because in my heart, I felt at this time that that's what it possibly could be. And so when I had him tell me that, I just knew it. Intuitively, I knew it. I knew it was spot on. I had never had any kind of scan or test that he could see really what was going on inside my body. And that's how I came to get my first Lyme diagnosis.
So Brett, we've had other people talk to us about this biofeedback testing, and they've said the same thing you've said. And it hasn't been a lot of people, but they said that it was spot on, that these practitioners are able to tell them the exact symptoms they're experiencing and then tell them you have chronic Lyme disease. So I guess the first question I have for you is, what was this test like? You mentioned you were holding on to something. So for you, what was it like for the 20 minutes while the scan was happening? And was there any discomfort? Was it something that is intimidating? You know, walk us through the process of the test.
No. So he has you hold this little thing. I believe it's like a little stick, and then he sticks these little electrodes on you. It's like these little wires. And I think he did like a couple little patches. And you just aren't supposed to talk during the test. Quiet and just breathing as normal. No pain whatsoever. It's just very simple. Very, very simple.
So once you had this Lyme diagnosis, did you want to follow up with blood work, or did you jump right into treatment at this point?
I didn't, because at this point I was starting to talk to him, and he goes, I see patients like you all the time. He goes, they've gone to so many different practitioners, kinesiologists, they've seen MD doctors, they've seen specialists, and even ones who get a Lyme test, your chances of it coming back negative are so high. And he goes to tell me that this is what you have. And I said, I believe it. As I started doing more and more research, it was so spot on that I didn't feel like at this point I wanted to go and test, because I didn't want for myself to be more confused. The hardest thing about that was now trying to convince my family that I have Lyme disease, which was really difficult and took many years.
And Brett, I think that's a layer in itself, that you had to convince your family you had an illness, and you don't see that with a lot of other diseases. So
no.
When you went back, walk us through what that was like, going back and telling your family that I had this biofeedback testing, I have chronic Lyme disease. You know, what was that exchange like with you and your family at that point?
They just thought I had mental issues. They thought I was just dealing with depression. They thought, oh, I had anxiety. I was kind of made out to be the crazy one. I've always been more emotional, and I like to talk. I like to share what I'm going through. And I really think I know they did not take me seriously. And I know now at this day, they just were not educated. And they weren't educated on just how severe I really was sick, because my family was seeing me, but I was married and I was at home all the time. And of course, when I go to see my family, I can put on a happy face and, you know, I can try to be myself as much as possible, but nobody saw what was going on behind closed doors.
So Brett, now you are married and your husband sees what's going on behind closed doors. How did he react to your chronic Lyme diagnosis from the biofeedback testing?
He thought it was wild. He goes, this is crazy, but he thought it was great that I got a diagnosis and I was getting answers. He was so happy that I, finally decided to do this test, and having someone in his family already having Lyme, even though he wasn't familiar with it, he thought, great, she can connect with my cousin and, they can kind of work things out. The thing with my doctor, that doctor at the time, he still didn't take me seriously. Even though he diagnosed me, he goes, okay, well, what I would recommend, depending on how severe you are, he goes, I would do stem cells. I would do stem cell therapy. But I would try thymus therapy first. He goes, I would try to do thymus therapy, thymus injections weekly, and do those for, 11 to 12 weeks, and then kind of see where you're at. So I talked it over with my husband, and to get stem cell therapy was $25,000. So at the time, my husband goes, well, we're not going to do that now, but now that we have the diagnosis, why don't we start with what he's recommending, and then let's see where you go from there. So I go, okay, I want to process this first before I jump into anything. So in my brilliant young age, I decided, I'm already sick. Why don't I, before I start thymus therapy, why don't I just get implants? Why don't I get breast implants? Let's just throw those into the mix. Always wanted to have breast implants, and I'm just going to go for it. So from the diagnosis, which happened in January of 2015, I got implants put in. Come here, my doggy.
No worries.
A month and a half later, I had already had this appointment. So I had had this appointment before I had gotten this Lyme diagnosis. Then I go, well, I'm already sick, and I hadn't heard anything at this point of implants making you sick. And I go, well, they're not going to make me worse, and at least they could help me be happy for the time being until I figure out what I'm going to do with treatment. So I get my implants in, and immediately within putting them in, I knew something was wrong. I just knew it. And again, at this time in 2015, breast implant illness was not even really a big thing, or at least I wasn't aware and wasn't a part of groups and support groups and information. So I get this diagnosis in January. In February 2015, I get breast implants, and I'm just getting I thought I was sick, and I just get worse and worse and worse. And finally I go, okay, let's do the thymus therapy. I do the thymus therapy. Nothing changes, nothing. I feel no difference.
Brett, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. Do you mind explaining what is thymus therapy for our listeners?
I'm not even 100% certain what it is myself. So it helps stimulate your thymus gland. And so it's these injections that help build your immune system to better handle Lyme, is what I was told. Till this day, I really don't even know what I was taking, to be totally honest. These shots came from Germany, and I can't even tell you what really was in them. So I'm sure if I reached out to this doctor now, he could tell me, but I don't even know really. They were just called thymus shots.
So from what I understand, the thymus therapy is an immune modulating therapy, which helps your immune system get out of the autoimmune phase where it's attacking healthy parts of your body and get reset to focus on attacking the real bad things, is what I understand the thymus therapy to be. But it sounds like because you were so sick and now you had the breast implant illness on top of that, which probably made your immune system go completely haywire, it didn't help at all for you.
Didn't help at all. Whereas my husband's family, who had done these immune modulating shots, they had all felt great after them. They go, oh, this is great. Any little tiny ailment they had was gone, and it was fine. And me, I go, this isn't helping at all. And finally, I think it was March or April. And after doing the shots, after having implants, I just begged my husband. I said, I really, really cannot go on. I have to get to Germany. I have to get to Germany to where this doctor is working. I have to do these stem cells. I'm willing to start a GoFundMe. I am willing to ask for help. I just have to get here. And we had called the doctor, and he just said, my wife has just progressively gotten worse. We thought she was bad in January. She's just really bad now. We just cannot go on any longer. And he goes, I can get her in at the end of May. Why don't you guys fly out, and we're going to get her in, and we're going to get her stem cells. So
I interrupt real quick and ask you a question. That the doctor that diagnosed you and this doctor that you're referring to, who had a facility in Germany, are you comfortable sharing this doctor's name?
sure. It was Dr. Phil at Infusio.
And is this Phil, who is the founder of Infusio?
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to point out that, I don't believe in coincidences, and the fact that you happen to get diagnosed because somebody recommended you get tested by the founder of Infusio, which is one of the most well-known Lyme clinics in the world, is really powerful. I think that's really a big part of your story. So I just wanted to interrupt and point that out. So I'm sorry for interrupting. I defer back to you.
That's okay. That's okay. Because he really did change my life in giving me that diagnosis, and really actually saved me, I would say, because he was so spot on. So Infusio was where I was going. And at this point, I had been so sick I was 20, I'd been sick since I was 17. And this is when I really felt like my mindset was such a big deal, because a lot of money was going into this. And I really wanted to work on mindset. And whether this treatment was going to work or not, I wanted to change my mindset. If I were to have to deal with this disease for the rest of my life, I have to change my mindset. Something has to give. And getting to Germany alone was so difficult. I was so sick, and my husband was flying with me. We get to the airport in New York. They look at his passport and they will not allow him to go to Germany because it was expiring in 3 months. So even though they had let us fly from LA to New York, an almost 5-hour flight, nobody ever said anything. They go, I'm sorry, I don't think Germany will allow you in, so we're not going to allow you to fly. So here I am deathly sick at this point. I have never traveled alone. I'm still young, and I have to take these flights to Germany, in a country that's not super well in speaking English. It's not just like traveling to Mexico, where it seems a lot easier for us. So we land. I have a driver pick me up. I don't know what he's saying. He takes me to this little apartment in near Infusio, and the doctor says, that he had been emailing us at this point, telling us my schedule, and we're going to start here. This is what we're going to do. We'll have a driver pick you up every morning. And of course, the first week of treatment is the most difficult. And I had nobody. I was all by myself in a foreign country. I didn't even hardly know Dr. Phil. I had only met him, a couple times from visiting the States. My in-laws were very close with him. And so I'm just here, and I was just trying to function, and I was just so ill. I could go back, and I should have brought those out. I have from years and years ago, but we did IVs. So IV therapy, lots of Myers cocktail IVs. And I believe it was on day 2 or 3 of treatment, I had to take a car. I think it was like 3 to 4 hours from where Infusio was to actually do the stem cells. So again, by myself, and there was one other patient in the car, this older gentleman, and we're in this car. This driver's driving us to this middle of little town, and they took 25 vials of my blood. 25 vials. I think that till this day, that's the most blood I've ever taken. I do frequently about 20 vials several times a year, but 25, that was a lot. And they were taking my blood for my stem cells. And so I go back, and it was hard. It was really hard. I was detoxing and herxing extremely bad that first year, or first year, that first week. And finally my husband made it back, because he got in and got his passport renewed, and he was there the second week of treatment. And finally, the second week of treatment, even though I hadn't received my stem cells yet, I kind of started to turn a little bit of a corner, and I started to get a little bit more energy, and I think my body was better handling these IVs better. And fast forward to the end of that second week, and I received my stem cells. And I believe they took around the count for the stem cells was like a million stem cells. And then it multiplied. I'm pretty sure they put about 6 million back into me, 5 to 6 million stem cells back into me. So when I got it, I just prayed. And I was like, if this is not, just please help me with my mindset. This is going to work. I felt like I really was manifesting it. And I came home and I started doing a lot better. A lot better.
Brett, so you were there for about, was it 2 weeks? How long were you there in total? Okay. So you're there for 2 weeks. And when you went to give blood and you donated the 25, or you gave the 25 vials of blood, did they extract stem cells from the blood? Is that what you were saying?
Yes. Yep.
So
they extract the stem cells from the blood. They spin it. I mean, I'm not a scientist. I don't even really understand it. They somehow extracted to where it separates the blood and the stem cells, basically. So you're not like putting blood back into you, but you're just extracting the stem cells.
And leading up to that, for the first week, you did it sounds like Myers cocktails, a lot of immune boosting supplements and IVs, and some probably detox things as well, I'd imagine, while you were there.
Yes, lots of like bone broths and soups and diet were incorporated in that as well. I did some laser therapy. I'm trying to think what else I did. Yeah, I think it was mainly IVs and like laser therapy.
And when you got the stem cells in the second week, was it one shot? Was it one infusion of the stem cells? And how long did that last?
One shot, one infusion. And it was a big, thick, big, gigantic vial of it. And I can't remember, since it's been so long, how exactly they did that. But I want to say through an IV or a port, they put them into me.
And did you feel anything, Brett, that day you received the stem cells? And if not, did you feel anything when you returned home shortly after?
I want to say I felt anything from that day other than relief. I just felt this journey had been so long that for the first time in a very long time, I was hopeful. And I figured, this is a very big journey. I've traveled a long way. This has to help me in some way. It has to. I just felt in my intuition that this is going to help me. And even if it's, not for a long time, at least temporarily, it's going to give me relief, is what I felt like it was going to do.
And at this point, was Infusio in Beverly Hills not open? I do know there's an Infusio clinic now in Beverly Hills. So was it just not available yet?
It was
wasn't open?
not open yet.
So Brett, talk to us more about when you got home. You still didn't really feel much better, but it was sort of relief that it was over and hope that it's gonna help. Walk us through the next couple of weeks and months. Did it actually help you? And what was that like?
So I came home, and one of my things I had always wanted to try, because I hadn't exercised in so long, I was doing lots of Pilates and yoga and those types of exercises, is I really wanted to push myself. And I wanted to sign up for CrossFit. And so that was one of my things in helping my mindset, was committing to something that was just, I had been so engulfed with my disease and trying to find answers. And I felt like at this time, I still had so many unanswered questions, but I just wanted to focus on something other than Lyme. So I came home and I started to slowly feel better. I kind of started to wake up a little bit earlier. I started to get a little pep in my step, and I committed myself to this new workout. I got involved with new peers, and slowly but surely I started to get better. I started to get more energy. My brain fog was getting a little bit better. My sleep was a little bit better. And slowly but surely, I just started being able to handle and take on more things that I had in a very long time. And part of this, of getting better, was really throwing myself into health and wellness, because as going back, one of my biggest things was I wanted to get into health and wellness. And so when I came home, I just told my husband, I said, I've always wanted to be a personal trainer. I want to get into health and helping others, maybe who are sick or stuck in mindset. And I just want to help others because I feel like if I can help others, it's going to make me feel better. And it did. And so I got my personal training license. And in this, I wanted to start competing in bodybuilding. And I was starting to be able to work out several days a week, and I was feeling pretty good. I wasn't feeling perfect or amazing, but I was feeling a lot better than I had in the past.
And Brett, this was within the first few months of you coming home from Germany.
Yes. And really, I would feel like it was because of like that heavy mindset of like, this is going to work is what really kind of pushed me to.
But Brett, what were the expectations set by the doctors in Germany at Infusio? Did they tell you that it was going to take 6 months, a year, several months? What did you walk away thinking based on the treatment you received?
He told me within 6 months, I should have I believe it was 80% of my symptoms diminish. And within a year, I should be at 90% of my symptoms diminished. And one question I had asked him was, is this going to get rid of my Lyme? Am I not going to deal with this anymore? And he said, no. And I was thinking in my head, okay, so I'm spending all of this money, I'm doing this, and even if it works, but I in the back of my head, I just kept thinking, okay, so it's not killing the Lyme? Because that's what I asked. I said, so is it actually killing? Because as my knowledge is it's a bacteria, obviously. And just common sense, I thought, okay, well, I have to kill the bacteria. So if I'm not killing the bacteria, I thought, so it's just going to go dormant. And that's kind of how he explained it. Yeah, it's your immune system. He goes, by doing the stem cells, we are better making your immune system to better deal with the Lyme. So hopefully your symptoms diminish to down to 90%, and you don't really have to deal with this ever again. And I said, well, what about stress? Is what if, stressful, life is stressful. There's always a death. There's always something stressful that's happening, a job change or a family member or a change in life. And he goes, well, if you ever need to come back, then you know where to find me. But you should be good. You should be good to go, and you shouldn't need to do this ever again. You shouldn't have any issues. And I go, okay, well, again, with this mindset, I think, okay, well, this is going to work. It's going to change my life. And it did. It actually did temporarily. It really did change my life. I came home, I started getting better and better energy wise. I was dealing with stress a lot better. I was having difficult conversations. I was being able to, function more as a normal, as you could say, normal human being. And in this, I just wanted so badly to be separated from my Lyme. And this is when I started to compete competitively in bodybuilding. And if you're familiar with bodybuilding at all, it's extremely stressful on the body. You're extremely limited in what you can eat. You're calorie restricted. Your body is put under an extreme amount of stress. But at this point, I felt like I needed something to really challenge me. I just wanted that really hard mental grit, and I wanted to put myself in something where I could put my head down and I could grind it out and just focus on something other than Lyme. And that's exactly what bodybuilding did for me. And during that process, I had built up my business, and I was now working with clients and training them and helping hundreds of men and women. And it was so satisfying. But it wasn't until after my first competition that some of my Lyme symptoms started coming back. And those were the fatigue, major stomach issues. My depression was kind of coming back again, and just starting to become really tired again. And at this first competition, I had won and made it to nationals. And so with that, I thought, well, I have to go to nationals. I placed first in this competition, and I felt like I had worked so hard for this, and I'd been through so much that I wanted to do it again. And it was when I started to compete that second time that I knew something was off. I knew I was pushing my body too much. And I just knew it. I knew that I shouldn't have done this. I should have not done this. But my thinking at the time was, well, if I'm going to have Lyme for the rest of my life, I want to do what I want to do. And I was. And so it's like, now that I look back on it, I'm still happy that I did it, because it taught me so much, and it taught me to have consistency and to have grit and to be committed. And I ended up stopping competing because I knew I wanted to have children one day, and I didn't want it to mess with my hormones long term, even though I was a 100% natural bodybuilder, but still just eating at such a calorie deficit. I knew it wasn't healthy, and I just was not feeling great. I was starting to get my major digestion issues. My sleep was getting terrible again. My fatigue. I went from being able to work out 2 hours a day at the gym to struggling to make it there, for 3-4 days a week for an hour at a time. So I had significantly decreased like my working out, and it just progressively from there just started getting worse again.
So Brett, talk to us about, at this point, you went to Germany, you got better, and now you're starting to get sick again. You mentioned early on that your family just didn't believe you, and they thought you were just crazy. So at this point, did they actually believe that you had Lyme disease because you went and got treatment for Lyme and started to feel better, or were they still doubting that you were really sick?
No, they were still doubting me this whole time. They didn't do any research. They, from the little bit of research they did, of course, because normal MDs, they will diagnose you with like a psychiatric diagnosis. So from the little bit they had done, they knew nothing. Even though I had gone and done this lengthy treatment,
and we're feeling better,
home, and I was feeling better. They could see the difference. They just thought, oh, well, she's just on to the next thing. She's committed to the next thing. And I just constantly was in this push and pull with trying to help people understand. And I knew even when I was competing and was so-called at my best, I wasn't. I was still sick. I just was so much better from where I was that I really emphasized the good part of what I was dealing with.
So Brett, let me ask you a question about this. So for people that are listening that are struggling to get their family to believe that they're sick, whether they don't have a diagnosis yet or they do, and people just don't want to believe it because it's such a controversial disease, what advice would you give them based on what you've learned with your family to help them shortcut their family's belief of their illness?
A good thing is to watch the documentary Under Our Skin, or Under My Skin. I think it's that one. Educate them on the symptoms. So educate them on what falls under having Lyme. It doesn't take having a positive blood test to mean that you have Lyme. And that's the biggest thing, is education, is trying to educate them. And second, believing in yourself, because I dealt with for a very long time through friends and family that I was labeled the crazy one. I still have people who label me that I'm crazy because I have gone through an incredibly hard journey. And it's finding someone who does believe you and who will talk to you, and getting your circle and building your self-esteem from there and sharing your journey. So it's sharing your journey, whether it's just with your spouse or your best friend or your mate and your friend, and just having those like open conversations, because community is very important, because this is obviously, as we all know, a very lonely disease.
So Brett, talk to us more about now what happened after you started to feel unwell again after overdoing it and physically exerting yourself too much. And now your symptoms are starting to pop back up. Did you go back to Infusio? Did you get more stem cells? What happened next?
I didn't. So I just thought, I'm going to stop competing. Let's try and reduce the stress from the gym and the external stressors that were not necessary. So I thought, let's increase my calories. Let's decrease the gym. Let's work on some of these, issues and see if things resolve. And some of it did. I started to get a little bit energy, a little bit, and but I could still tell something was off. And so it wasn't until the following, I stopped competing in June, and I forget which year, 2016. I think it was June. June of 2016, I believe, 2017. And it wasn't until January that I just told my husband again, I said, something's wrong. I feel like something's off. I'm not as sick as I was before I got stem cells. So this is a good sign, but something's off and I need I don't know if I need another round of stem cells. And this is at the point where Infusio had opened up Beverly Hills. So I had gone up there and seen Dr. Phil again and gotten a couple IVs. Again, I think it was just Myers cocktail that I could have gotten pretty much anywhere here in Orange County, like an IV place. And I did some laser therapy, infrared therapy, actually, specifically. And he goes, yeah, you can do stem cells again, but it's going to be expensive. And he goes, why don't we just do NAD therapy on you? And I wasn't super familiar with that. And I go, okay. I'm like, I don't even know what, NAD therapy is. What does it do? And so I go back up to Infusio for 4 days. I go through this 4-day therapy. I do the, what is that called? With the ozone therapy.
Ozone.
Yeah. So I had done ozone therapy several times when I was up there with blood. And, I had remembered when I was in Germany, they did ozone therapy as well. That was actually one of the treatments, just remembered that I felt good.
Did ozone help you? Was that an immediate thing where you felt better?
It was an immediate thing. It was an immediate thing. And it wasn't night and day. It just gave me a little bit of energy, I would say, and a clearer mind. So went back to Infusio, fast forward. Okay, I do my 4 days. And I didn't really notice a big difference. I just still felt like something was off. And
this was NAD, the 4 days of NAD therapy. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. NAD, if I'm remembering correctly. Pretty sure it's NAD therapy.
And Brett, what is NAD? I think a lot of our listeners probably don't know what that is.
So from my understanding is it kind of helps like all of your cells. And again, I was naive still at this point where I was educated, but I didn't even do a lot of research on it. And same thing. I mean, I could even look it up because I'm not
I think you're spot on, Brett. I'm pretty sure, from what we've learned on the podcast, NAD is really used to help stimulate cell regeneration.
Cell regeneration, that's the word.
Yep, and it really helps, I think, with cognitive processing as well, with brain fog. Those are two of the biggest things it helps with. That's
exactly what it is. Thank you. I still have, as you can tell, Lyme brain.
I'm right there with you. Don't worry.
And keeping track of all of these things, it's like, I can't even remember some of these things that I do because half the time they don't work.
And it sounds like NAD didn't work for you, right? You did one for 4 days and didn't feel any better.
Nothing. I felt nothing. If anything, I felt worse. To be like, I felt worse. And so I go, okay, well, I just stayed in a crappy hotel in the middle of West Hollywood. I feel worse. Like, this is a joke. And so I was hesitant. I thought, okay, well, should I do another round of stem cell therapy? What should I do? And at this point, Infusio was doing the stem cells from fat. So they were taking like fat and taking the stem cells from fat cells or something like that. And from what I had been reading on the Infusio page, the results weren't great. And the results seemed to be a lot better from the blood, from when the blood was extracted and not from like the fat. So
Can I
just
interrupt you
use-
again? I apologize
Yeah.
to interrupt you, but there's so much good information here. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure we point out. So from what I understand, Infusio in Germany does the stem cells that come from your blood, but
Yes.
in Beverly Hills in California, they were from fat stem cells. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes,
Okay.
because of the regulations.
Yes.
This is as of a couple of years ago. Again, I believe Infusio is open in Beverly Hills, but I don't even think they do stem cells there anymore. I'm pretty sure they shut that portion down. I could be wrong. And I'm not even sure if you would probably know better than me. I don't even know if Infusio is open in Germany anymore. From the last I had heard, there was some movement going on with that. And that was like a year and a half ago. So, but Infusio in Beverly Hills, their way, because of regulations here in the United States and California, was from fat. And then the stem cells in Germany was blood. And from the fat, from their group, from personal testimonials of people I had personally reached out to, they didn't see a big difference. None of them had seen that like big difference I had felt with the blood stem cells. And to me, that was a red flag, because I already felt like the stem cells had only worked for a couple of years. And then I slowly was reverting back. So that to me was a red flag. I just didn't want to spend any more money if I wasn't 100% positive. And I still knew that stem cells do not kill the Lyme bacteria. And as I was starting to research more and more, I knew I had to find something that killed the Lyme bacteria. Because if you're not going to be killing the pathogen, stressful events, like I've said, are always going to come up. Whether you are competing, whether you're getting married, whether there's a death, there's always going to be these stressful events. And I thought, if I'm going to spend the rest of my life, I know I'm going to have these stressful events, I can't be spending all this money every couple of years to do stem cells. It just was not practical. So at this point is actually when I had found somebody, or they actually found me, somebody on Instagram who had followed me on my page and saw me posting about what I had done in the past and, current things I was doing to try to manage my Lyme, had reached out to me, and she goes, "Have you ever heard of bee venom?" And I go, "No, what does that even mean?" And she goes, "Oh, I sting myself with live bees, and there's a whole Facebook group on it, and you can get information there." And she goes, I've been feeling so much better these last several years. You should look into it. And I'm like, okay, sounds good. That's so random and so interesting to me. So I had joined one of these groups. Can't remember the name of it because there's a couple of them now. And I had joined, I kind of was looking through people's testimonials, and there was some good, there was some bad. And I just kind of kept it in the back of my head as I was continually thinking of, okay, because I knew the next step that I wanted to take. At this point, I had dealt with Lyme for so long. I felt like I had tried so many different therapies. I had gone up and down. I'd gotten better. I had gotten worse. I kind of was evening out. I knew that whatever I invested in, the next thing, like I really wanted to think about it. I wanted to research it. I wanted to ask all the questions and really figure out, okay, how exactly is this treating my Lyme? How is this getting at this pathogen? So during this, I wanted to get pregnant and to become a mother. And me and my husband had discussed, okay, well, if we're going to have kids, obviously one of the big discussions was, well, what about Lyme? Because we knew that Lyme could be passed to your child. And my response was, I knew I could not live without children, and that I wanted to have children, and that at least if my child were to have Lyme disease, that, I would know the proper steps to take. And in the hopes of, hoping he didn't have it, but if he did, I could get him, testing and get him into a lot more advanced facility than I had ever been to. So I, again, just thinking all this is in the back of my head. So I decided to get pregnant. And I got pregnant very quickly, and I had a very healthy pregnancy, and I felt pretty good. I had aches and pains, and, but again, I was carrying a child. And this is really the turning point as this journey has kind of gone up and down and up and down. And I was a lot more versed with Lyme. During my pregnancy, I really started to research Venom Therapy. And I had decided that is what I'm going to do after I have my child. I thought, I feel like this, to me, from some of the studies I had read, from testimonials, I really felt like it resonated with me more than any other treatment I had ever done. It made the most sense to me. And I just loved the one study that took bee venom and they put it like in a petri dish against the Lyme disease. And then they did, it with the antibiotics as well. And the antibiotics, there was still some Lyme left. And with bee venom, it completely eradicated it. So I go, okay, because we know at this point, I never wanted to go the antibiotic route because of the horrible side effects that I personally didn't want to deal with, that I had talked to people who had gone through that. And I go, okay, this makes sense. If they're taking this ancient modality, I love that it's holistic. That really resonated with me. But it was holistic, but it was also very strong, which is why, warning, you do not want to just go sting yourself with a bee. It's not that simple. So as I was pregnant, I'm kind of researching this, and it wasn't until I was in labor, I had a natural birth. I birthed my son at a birthing center, that I had been in labor for almost 20 hours. And I was begging my husband, I'm so tired. I'm so dying. Give me the epidural. Give me the epidural. And there's no epidural at birth centers. And I'm like, I want to transfer. I want to transfer. And I'm getting at this turning point of, I felt like I couldn't keep going. And they go, well, do you want nitrous oxide? They go, to help take the edge off. And I am like, I didn't want to do nitrous oxide, but I was like, you know what? Yes, just give it to me, because I will do whatever at this point. I'm like, to get this baby out. So I was on nitrous oxide for a couple hours, and I had never been on nitrous oxide, and it kind of makes your head feel all big and fuzzy. And I ended up having knocks, and it was beautiful, amazing, one of the most transforming days of my life. And I met my beautiful son. And when he was born, I just felt off. I just obviously had dealt with this transforming experience, and I'm holding my baby, and I go home and I'm on such a high from all the oxytocin. And for 3 days straight, I didn't sleep. I just had these crazy rush of hormones. And 3 weeks later, I still hadn't slept. I just had not slept since he was born. And I started to really go into this psychosis. I just spiraled. I had been dealing, like I said, with some of these issues, Lyme issues, brain fog, insomnia, and it hit me like a semi-truck. And I was trying to speak to my family and my friends, and everybody was just telling me, it's just newborn, it's so hard, it's this. And I was like, something is wrong. Something is seriously wrong. I'm like, I feel like I'm not inside my body. I have the worst postpartum anxiety, debilitating to where even when he would sleep, he's a newborn, he slept hours a day, and I would go to close my eyes, I would be jolted because my system was so wound up, and that I could not sleep. I would think that he was crying. I had horrible anxiety. I just, it was terrible, like terrible. And I just knew, I was like, I have to get on this treatment. I'm going to have to get treatment for Lyme or something. Something is going on. And as time went on, my son was dealing with health issues. At 10 weeks old, we were in the hospital, and he had a kidney infection. It was a bladder turned kidney infection. And from that point on, I knew something was off with him, because I was like, no, I don't know any child that, they say, oh, bladder infections happen, but it's a lot more common in girls. And with boys, I just, we were in the hospital for 3 days, and they just kept telling me, oh, this must have just been a fluke thing. Yeah, his kidney's enlarged, but, I think this is just a fluke thing. I think he's going to be okay. It's something, my intuition has always brought me back. It has never led me astray. It never. Anytime I've had this deep gut feeling, I've always been pretty spot on. And so I just started researching, and I started talking, and I ended up finding a childhood friend that I had grown up with, and her daughter had dealt with like chronic bladder infections. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to keep her in the back of my mind, because if he ever gets one again. Sure enough, at 11 months old, he got another bladder infection. And I take him to the doctor, and they wanted to basically tell me that he had a bladder infection because he wasn't circumcised. And I'm like, that doesn't sound right to me. I'm like, how is his kidney so inflamed? Like, this sounds like an internal issue rather than a foreskin issue. And, so they put him on antibiotics again, and, okay, we clear it. And at this time, I'm like, he's been on antibiotics multiple rounds, and he's only 11 months old. I'm like, this is terrible. He had already dealt with skin issues and, spitting up and sensitive to, different foods. And then again, bam, a month later, gets another bladder infection. So 3 bladder infections within a year. And I go, something is not right. And so sure enough, I take him back to a pediatric urologist, and they go, oh yeah, well, what we recommend is either, circumcising him or putting this ointment on and doing this protocol. And I was not okay with that. And so I finally reached out to my friend, and I go, okay, this doctor obviously isn't working. And I ended up seeing a different pediatric urologist. Thank the heavens, because he was amazing. He immediately said, I have a very hard time believing that this is being caused by his foreskin. I believe that this is being caused from internal. Something internally is going on. And during all this, I'm still dealing with all of my Lyme. I am sicker than a dog. My child is now having these symptoms that I was thinking, is this Lyme? Because is this Lyme settling in the kidneys? Is this Lyme settling in the bladder? Something's off with us. And we do some tests on him. And one of the tests was like a MAG3, which is a pretty gnarly test. They send like a radioactive fluid in their body, and he has to lay there for, I think, like 2 hours, and they test at what point the kidneys are draining and all of that. And so after this test, it was actually we got really good news that his kidneys were draining fine. They were functioning right where they needed to be functioning, which was huge. And his anatomy was off. His right side ureter had a hard time draining. And so if you think about the bladder, here's the kidney, the ureter comes down and meets the bladder. And something with the connection right there, his right side just drained a little bit slower. And it's something that unfortunately, he would just have to outgrow. But the doctor was pretty confident that he goes, with children who deal with this, usually over the age of 1 is kind of the cutoff of like, the infections start to slow down. So during this, before we could get this MAG3 test, which took 3 months to get into, he was on antibiotics every day for 3 months. Every day. because my doctor and his doctor at the time was so scared of him getting another infection, and we didn't know the functioning of the kidneys. So like kidneys work at 50 and 50%. So he's like, if his right side kidney is only functioning at 20% and he gets another infection, he might lose his kidney. And so that was terrifying, because obviously I don't want him to lose his kidney. We don't know what's really going on. Come to find out, they're functioning at 1550. It's just draining slower from the ureter to the bladder. And so no surgery was needed, which was awesome, because we were pretty positive before doing that test with his urologist that he was going to have surgery to correct it. He goes, you know, I think he's good. You can pull him off of the antibiotics and, you know, go on your way, and let's keep in contact. Let's, you know, keep me at. Well, from that last bladder infection when he was a year old, he hasn't had any. So, and he's had an ultrasound, and he's outgrown his little issue and hasn't had any bladder kidney issues since. So where I'm getting with all of this is, as I'm dealing with all of this, of course, mom intuition, I've always felt like my son, I hope that my son isn't dealing with Lyme, but I have a feeling that he has dealt or is dealing with Lyme. So with all of this, I'm dealing with all of this, and my postpartum just getting really, really bad, very, very dark and deep postpartum depression. I just knew something had to change. And this is when I took the steps, and I was like, I am going to learn how to do bee venom. I'm going to learn about my body, and I want to be tested for every autoimmune disease that you possibly can, because I'm like, something is wrong. No doctor has properly diagnosed me with autoimmune, even though I knew I was dealing with something autoimmune, and nobody had diagnosed me. And even with all this, after all this research I had done, I still was terrified of going to a doctor and being rejected. And it wasn't until I took a course to learn how to do bee venom, and there was certain blood work that they recommended and that they do, and come to find out, where I'm going to piece this all together, is one of my autoimmune is I have pernicious anemia, where I cannot process B12. I cannot process it through my gut. I basically have an antibody that blocks the absorption of B12. So the only way to get B12 in is through intramuscular injections. And there's 3 different types of B12, so it depends on your genes. So you have to, you know, get your genetic testing done to figure out, do you need a methylcobalamin? Do you need a hydroxycobalamin? Do you need the I forget the other, it's like a CY cyanocobalamin. Well, from that point of having my son, and from getting this other autoimmune diagnosis finally, when I was in labor, I did nitrous oxide. Guess what? The #1 vitamin that nitrous oxide depletes? B12. I had this crazy aha moment. I started bawling, because I knew it was like, I had this beautiful son. I had, you know, planned for this beautiful birth. I get on this nitrous oxide, and from that point, it was like done. Any B12 in my system that I had completely depleted me of it, because I was on nitrous oxide for 3 hours.
But Brett, you were just a stressed mom. You were just a mom who lacked sleep, who wasn't really sick, right?
Who has postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, postpartum anxiety. That's just what I have. I'm crazy again.
I do want to circle back, because you mentioned your breast implants as well. Mm-hmm. So you had your breast implants. We talked about how we obviously know that was very harmful, because your immune system can't, you know, is really looking at it as a foreign object, and it's causing your immune system to go haywire. Did you ever have your breast implants removed? Did you have an explant surgery?
Yes. So I had breast implant illness. And so this was another thing, was while I was pregnant, actually right before I got pregnant, I went and saw, there's a couple of specialists here in Newport Beach. And I had gone to one of the well-known specialists, and right before I got pregnant, and I wanted to take my implants out. And he suggested I needed a lift as well. And if I wanted to breastfeed, he would recommend waiting to take my implants out. So I said, okay, that makes sense. You know, breastfeeding was very important to me. And Then I got pregnant. And so when I was really looking in and I started this course for bee venom, I knew for sure I had to take my implants out. I had no idea if they were causing, me issues or not, but I knew, again, intuition, gut feeling, I knew they were. I knew something was preventing me from getting sick. And at this point, I was learning so much information and uncovering so many things I had never learned before that I said, I don't care. Screw this. I want these implants taken out of me so I can heal. And one of my biggest things before I started bee venom was I wanted to take them out because I did not want to start bee venom therapy and then 6 months in be hindered again. I felt like, okay, I'm really putting everything out there. I feel like at this point was like the big turning point with having my son was really like, I am a mom. I have to bring my resources in. I need to be smart about this and I need to be strategic because I don't have time to just be trying all these different things. So one of the very first things before I started bee venom was taking my implants out. And it was 100% one of those turning points in my healing. I felt by taking my implants out, it allowed me to begin healing. And come to find out, I had only had my breast implants for 5 years, and my right one was ruptured, completely ruptured. So I was having breast implant illness. I was dealing with silicone toxicity and heavy metals and all the awful things that breast implants have. And this is, again, I had gotten my implants in when I was 20. And when I got them taken out, I was 25. I had only had them 5 years. And I have pictures that, my whole right implant was so mangled. It looked like a bear got to it. It was horrible, completely yellow, discolored, and had just been leaking in my body for who knows how long.
So Brett, talk to us more about now when you finally made the decision, okay, I need to do bee venom therapy. And I guess before that, the question I have for you is you realized you had this problem, this autoimmune problem where you couldn't process vitamin B12.
Yep.
So did you start doing injections of B12 before
I
bee venom
did.
therapy?
But it took me.
I'm sorry, but did it help? Did that help? Was that an immediate help or was that a gradual thing over time that built up?
It was a gradual thing. And the reason for this was I had to try a couple different types of B12. So I started with the cyanocobalamin or something CY cobalamin B12. And that's basically kind of the most lowest grade of B12 that you can get. It has some fillers in there, I believe, some preservatives, and it's just not a very clean, as you could say, version of B12. So I didn't feel any difference. Then I tried methylcobalamin, and because I do have MTHFR gene mutation, and of course, methyl is supposed to be great for MTHFR. Well, it did the opposite effect. It made me extremely angry, very anxious. I felt on edge. And so I'm like, okay, this is not working. And it basically came down to my genes because I have some other genes, I think, which is COMT, if I'm remembering correctly. I think it's COMT, but that is I have a little bit more COMT than MTHFR. So then this is when I found the hydroxycobalamin. And when I started injecting with the hydroxycobalamin, I started to notice a little bit of a difference. And I was like, okay, my cognitive is getting a little bit better. I'm getting a little bit more energy. My depression's getting a little bit better. And I've now been injecting for a year and a half. And I feel like I'm getting better, but I'm still figuring my dosages out because it's so unique. Pernicious anemia is so unique to each individual. And it just really depends on so many different factors play into how much B12 you need. Did you go on a really long hike? What have you been eating? How has your stress been? Have you been exercising? And it's very unique. So I'm still figuring out the perfect dosage, but I feel like I am very close to getting it pretty spot on.
So right now, I'm really excited to hear about Venom Therapy. We've had a couple of other guests in the past talk to us about it, but walk us through the process. Did you do it yourself? Did you join, a group? I know there's a lot of Venom Therapy groups out there that kind of work with you to do this. So talk us through the actual implementation now and follow up with the Venom Therapy.
So in this, implants out, started my B12 injections first, try to get that going. And in this process, I was prepping my body. So another thing that was encouraged was to get celiac testing. So celiac testing is often very misdiagnosed, just like Lyme disease. But I had eaten mainly gluten-free for many years, but I cheated. I cheated, a couple times a month, and I'd have a slice of bread once a week, and I didn't feel anything from it. I felt nothing from it. And it wasn't until that I was extremely strict with going off of gluten, like very strict, not even eating out, for almost 8 weeks and cooking most of my meals, to then switching. And I did 6 weeks of gluten almost every day because I was prepping for an endoscopy, because I really wanted that immune reaction, because I wanted it, is most reactions, if there's any reaction going on with celiac in the gut, they can, pick it up from the endoscopy. So it was when that I did the 8 weeks, I don't really notice any difference, to where I reintroduced for 6 straight weeks. And I just was in pain, so depressed, felt horrible. My fatigue was much worse. And my endoscopy came back negative though. And so then I'm just like, okay, well, I did some more research, and from what I've collected is I just have a non-celiac gluten allergy. So, which again, I'm not discrediting that. I personally don't believe I do have celiac, just because I feel like if it's cross-contaminated, I don't see like a big enough impact to when I'm like eating it straight. So I really do feel like I have just an allergy to gluten. So finally, after that endoscopy and getting those results, I felt like, okay, I'm ready to start Venom Therapy. And Venom Therapy, for anybody listening, is a very serious therapy. It's a natural modality. It's an ancient modality, but it is not something to be taken lightly. It took me almost a year of prepping my body, doing tests, figuring out, trying to find what autoimmune issues I was dealing with to be able to start stinging. It also took going on a anti-histamine diet, and very, very low histamine diet, very healing foods, to really make my body as calm as I could to be able to handle the bee venom, because bee venom is an extremely potent medicine. And I had my first sting. I had gone to like a little workshop, and I had my first sting. And you sting on your back, or at least I sting on my back, because it helps disperse the venom throughout your system a lot quicker. So obviously your spine's connected to your organs, and circulatory, nervous system, brain, all your major organs. And that's the biggest thing, because when you have chronic Lyme, it's throughout your body, and it hides very easily. So by treating it on your spine, you're helping disperse that venom quicker. And it's not like, I've been stung even with stinging on my finger, and my finger will kind of swell up, or my hands have swollen up. But it's because it's more, even though the venom is getting in your bottom, it's more localized. Whereas when you're stinging on your back, your nerves are so sensitive back there that it's dispersing it really quickly throughout your body, so you can better handle the venom. And a note I should kind of add in there is, I actually thought I was allergic to bees my entire life, because I have had high histamine. Because when you have Lyme disease, almost, pretty much everybody has high histamine reaction from these bugs. So when I would get stung, I would swell up like a balloon. And so when I found out this therapy, I'm like, how is this going to work? Because I think I'm pretty allergic, and my dad's actually allergic to bees. And when I went to sting and I had my EpiPen, my Benadryl, and I went to testing my back and I was fine. And I go, whoa, I had a little inflammation and swelling at the side of the sting, which is very normal. But I go, okay, like maybe there's some hope in this. So from there, I just started treating and started stinging myself with these live bees.
So Brett, how did you feel when you did this workshop and you did your first sting and you had your EpiPen and you had your Benadryl? Did you feel any better afterwards, or was it really just sort of like nothing after?
No, I felt worse. I got a herpes, obviously, because it's so powerful that I had initially gotten energy, like it gave me energy. But then I was staying in a hotel and I went to go to sleep that night. And my mind was like 50 miles an hour, nonstop. And I just had like this adrenaline, because that's what Venom can do to you. It gives you an adrenaline rush. But I was hopeful. I was really hopeful. And the whole process of bee venom is not to rush it. It's very a personal journey. And again, there's many ways, to treat and to go. But what I was taught was to go really slow, really, really slow, and to be intuitive, to listen to your symptoms, these symptoms and signs. Are you getting worse? Are you getting better? Are you stuck in bed? Or are you, slowly being able to function more? Because at the end of the day, we want more function. We don't want dysfunction. So, I had ended up waiting after that little testing. Okay, I had to go home, get my bees, prep my stuff. And I started stinging right during when the pandemic hit. That's actually when I started stinging, was April of 2020. That was my first, I think it was April 6th, my first actual sting day. So I've now been stinging for a year and a half. And it has been a journey, let me tell you. It has been a journey for sure.
Well, Brett, you mentioned brain fog earlier, which you clearly don't have today. So I'm curious, at what point in using bee venom therapy did you notice a change for the better and realize, wow, this is really working?
It was very slight. It was not a aha moment. It wasn't I woke up and wow, I feel great. It's been very slow. And a lot of others who started with me are a lot higher as in stings. There are a lot more bees than I am. But something I always really came back to was, this is my personal journey. And for bee venom, I always knew it was going to be a 2 to 3 year process. And I was hoping for 2 years, and now it's looking like I'm going to be doing it for 3. And really just reassuring myself, kind of going back to when I got those stem cells and with the mindset. Whereas this time I felt like I wasn't more blind. I felt like I was a little naive and just, okay, yes, this, but with this time it's mindset, but also having that support and really taking my time with this. And so with my symptoms, very slowly over time, have gotten better. My brain fog is getting better. I can now have conversations and tell you, I still have Lyme brain. I, have little brain farts, but overall I'm improving and I'm getting better, which is amazing.
So Brett, talk to us about the actual process and, how many bees are you using? How often are you stinging? And you have to leave the bee in you. We understand that you have to leave it in there for 20 minutes before you pull the bee out. Is that correct?
So that's a difference. Is everybody who stings leaves it in for different points. I personally leave it in for 1 minute. So that's kind of 1 to 2 minutes is my max. And I'm up to 5 stings 3 times a week. And I leave each one in for at least a minute. But with my very first sting, I only left it in for 5 to 10 seconds because venom is so powerful. And it really did not understand how powerful bee venom is until I started stinging, where, I thought it was silly. I had read, leave it in for 5 to 10 seconds. Oh, that's not going to do anything. And then I would leave it in for a full minute and then I herks. So each sting I've really worked up. My very first sting, it was in for 5 to 10 seconds. Then it was 20 seconds, 30, 40, 50, up till I got a minute. And that's how I keep my regimen. I'm very regimented with that and not rushing the process, because anytime I've rushed this process, I have horrible herxing. And with herxing, there's a normal response of herxing, of course. When you're introducing a new method for treating Lyme, you're obviously killing off bacteria. But if your body cannot handle and process that detox efficiently, it can actually be extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous. So I go very slow. And like I said, I'm at 1.5 years in. Most people that I know are at 8 stings by now. And that's just not me. I've dealt with a lot of kind of hurdles along the way. I have 2 autoimmune. So I have pernicious anemia, I have rheumatoid arthritis, and I also have treated SIBO while stinging, which are all major issues.
Brett, as a side note, what did you use Cellcore to treat SIBO and herbal products?
I didn't. I actually didn't use Cellcore. I used, let's see here. I used some Metagenics products, and I worked with a practitioner who was amazing in helping me with treating my SIBO. But again, digestion is one of my biggest issues to this day that I still deal with. And so that is something that it was a brutal protocol, because I did an herbal protocol and I did it for like 3 months, and it was really hard. And I was stinging during that time too. So I think I was at 3 stings, about 3 stings when I was doing the herbal protocol, and I got through it and it helped a lot. But fast forward, just with life, it's, diet and traveling can affect me. So, my diet's not perfect. But over time, like I said, just my symptoms have slowly gotten better, especially my histamine response.
So I want to go back to the bee venom therapy. So do you think your histamine responses are now better because of the bee venom therapy specifically?
Yes, for sure.
What other properties does bee venom have to help? So like we talked about, obviously it can kill spirochetes, it can kill the Lyme bacteria, yeah. But the limited knowledge Rich and I have about bee venom therapy also helps really bolster or strengthen your immune system, and it can kill a wide variety of other pathogens, not just the Lyme bacteria. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And it basically, so with your histamine, so, and I have MCAS, so mast cell activation syndrome. So when you have, again, most people who have Lyme have this mast cell activation syndrome. So bee venom comes in and it actually helps destroy like that mast cell and like breaks it up. And again, I might not be describing this perfectly, but something with the properties in the bee venom help to really target the mast cells, which is causing that histamine response. So when I was first stinging, I had to be like on an extremely low histamine diet, because you're obviously introducing a histamine. So it's funny because you're introducing, bee venom, which can aggravate these mast cells, but in the long run, it actually ends up helping the mast cells and helps everything calm down. So that's why it's so important to go slow. And over time, I have been able to increase my histamine foods like crazy. I can eat so much more histamine. I can tolerate alcohol a lot better. I really, really had to cut alcohol when I was first stinging, like the first 6 months. I mean, like bare minimum. Now I can handle a couple, skinny margaritas a week and be okay. And I can still sting, and I'm not going to have side effects from it. However, when I was, first into this and first doing this bee venom, I could not do that. It would severely affect me and my stinging, and it can make you have an allergic reaction to the bees, which is what we do not want.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's really important to know we've had so many people tell us they're interested in bee venom therapy, but they have horrible histamine sensitivities, they have MCAS, and they can't do it. But it sounds like it's actually going to help them rather than hurt them in the long run.
Yes.
So,
yes, and I'm very, I haven't done it yet, but I will be testing probably early this next year. I want to do another endoscopy to see where my mast cells are at. Because I actually when I had my endoscopy, she also tested for mast cells, and they were really high. And so I'm really interested to do that endoscopy again to kind of see where my mast cells are.
Oh, you're gonna have to share that with us, and we'll update in the show notes of this podcast episode for people once you get that done. So they should come back and take a look so we can keep them posted. But
Yeah.
I do want to focus on, because we often know when you have Lyme, you generally have other things going on as well. So it's, it could be parasites, it could be other viruses, it could be co-infections, it could be Babesia, Bartonella, Ehrlichia, You mentioned you had Rocky Mountain Spotted Fever earlier. So does Venom Therapy address all of those things as well? Because some people think of it as, is it a targeted therapy, or is it more of like this broad spectrum immune boosting and sort of like broad spectrum anti-pathogen, protocol you can use?
So from my understanding, and if I'm saying this right, is I believe that it's immune modulating. So it's not just immune boosting. So that's the biggest difference, is it's actually like modulating your cells. It's, destroying, just getting into those cells and blasting these things. And that's why it's helping. It can help so much with the histamine, and obviously with the Lyme, and with breaking down those biofilms and actually killing that pathogen. So it is, I mean, I'm not a doctor. I can't, say if it's gonna 100% kill, the co-infections, but that is, yes, is from the people who have tested, tested positive for these bands and these different co-infections of Lyme. When they go to retest, when they're done with their treatment, all of it's negative. So yes, and it is antiviral, it's antiparasitical, bee venom, antiviral, antiparasitical, antibacterial. So yes, again, I don't know if there's an exact study on every single, co-infection, but from my knowledge, yes, it does treat all those things.
So I want to stress the fact that if it's an immune modulating therapy, and many of us with chronic Lyme have developed autoimmune diseases, probably more than one, modulating the immune system, or really resetting the immune system, is a powerful tool to help reverse or backtrack a lot of the autoimmune damage done from Lyme disease. So do you think that's helping you a lot as well?
100%. So what's interesting is the bee venom has brought out. So my very first autoimmune diagnosis was pernicious anemia. It wasn't until almost a year later I was positive for rheumatoid arthritis. I kept testing and testing, and I was teetering. You could see like my number in my rheumatoid arthritis. And I finally just got a positive rheumatoid arthritis. I believe it was in January of this year. So that's almost, just under a year of testing and doing my blood tests, and that it finally came positive. So from what others have experienced, they have reversed some of their autoimmune. So I have a dear friend, and she has, what is the autoimmune? Not rheumatoid, but can't even remember the name right now. One of them is, she's now negative. So when she goes to test for the autoimmune, it is reversed. So it's very powerful, and I'm very hopeful that my rheumatoid arthritis will be reversed. My pernicious anemia as of right now is not reversible. So it's like celiac, in where you cannot reverse celiac, and you cannot reverse pernicious anemia. So I will be injecting for the rest of my life with B12. But as of like rheumatoid arthritis, I'm hoping to be able to reverse that.
So Brett, most of the people listening to this podcast are in the throes of Lyme and trying to get better, or close to the end of their journey, or possibly in the beginning of their journey. What tip or hack or advice would you give to these people that can help them shortcut their journeys that you wish you had when you first got diagnosed with Lyme disease?
Build a community. So talk with others who have Lyme to help you to understand what treatments are out there, because there is a lot more treatments becoming available, and it can be very confusing on what to do. And talk to others who have been in your shoes, who have done treatments that resonate with you, because you have to do a treatment that resonates with you, because most treatments have a big commitment. Bee venom is one of the most commitment times, and it's very hard. And it's also what scares a lot of people, because it's a 2 to 3 year process. But to me, that resonated with me. That really resonated, because I felt like it would take at least that to kill all of this Lyme bacteria. All over 10 years of accumulating this Lyme bacteria, I felt like that resonated with me. And so build your community and try to find others, whether that's through social media or friends or local groups. Connect with others. And the second thing is getting a Lyme literate doctor. I'm actually for the first time seeing a Lyme literate doctor since Dr. Phil this next month in November. But again, I've been so skeptical because I was working with a group who really helped me. And then I felt like, okay, I needed some more personal attention to help me with some of these lingering issues that I'm dealing with. And so I'm meeting with her this next month. And again, from another fellow bee venom patient, she helped lead me in her direction, because not every Lyme literate doctor is going to be the right fit for you, or they might not help you in the right way. So really connecting with others, talking, resonating, and just leaning into your intuition to find that right doctor for you. A third thing is testing. So, testing for Lyme, you can test through it through your standard blood test. Don't 100% rely on that because it's often misdiagnosed if it's a negative. Something I learned was if a Lyme test is equivocal, that's a positive. So a lot of my tests, Lyme tests were actually equivocal, and that's a positive test. So, IGeneX is a great testing, just kind of see like where you're at, where your bands are at, and just try to understand it better. And know that you're not alone. There's a lot of us out there, and to ask questions. Do not stop asking questions. And I just love the power of social media right now. There is so many people who are helping with mold and parasites and SIBO and all of these things that I had no idea about when I first started learning about Lyme. I just thought I had Lyme, and okay, yeah, I had heard of co-infections, but okay, yeah, maybe autoimmune. But it wasn't until I kind of got my ducks in a row of, there's kind of a list of things that I would recommend going through and checking off before just treating Lyme.
So Brett, while you were working on your Lyme disease was working on you, and you were discovering things about yourself that you would have never learned had you not gone on this journey. So talk to us about what has been beautiful about your Lyme disease journey, and talk to us about how that has inspired you to reach out and help others on the journey.
It has taught me so much. I feel like one of the biggest things Lyme disease has taught me is to have empathy, is to really empathize, which can be a blessing and a curse sometimes, because I feel like I take on a lot of people's energies. But at the same time, I feel deeply for people because I have been in that really, really dark spot, really, really, really hard times. And it's also made me a lot stronger person. It's made me a stronger mom, a stronger wife, and it's really taught me what I want out of life and the kind of relationships I want, and how to look for people who love me and understand me. And in that, it's also taught me patience, because it took a lot of time with my family to understand really what I'm going through. And of course, nobody really understands it until you personally deal with Lyme. But they're so much more understanding and supportive this day, which is amazing, because I know so many Lyme patients don't have that. So I'm very grateful to have a good support system, today.
So tell us about what you learned about yourself, not just the lessons that you've learned and the ability to empathize, but what else did you learn about yourself? And specifically, as a young person, you always had this passion for health and fitness, and you had this passion for eating healthily. And how did that reveal itself after you sort of stripped away all of these sort of challenges or these expectations that are put on us by our families and by the educational system and by society in general?
I have learned about myself that I am capable of anything I put my mind to. That's really the biggest thing. And it might sound cliche, but if I put in the time and I believe in myself, because self-esteem is obviously a big issue when getting so sick, but believing in myself and giving myself grace to heal has been the biggest thing, because it has been very hard for me to give myself grace to actually heal and to unmask myself and get down to these nitty gritty and ugly layers sometimes that you deal with Lyme. And so I would say the biggest thing is just having respect for myself and giving myself time to heal.
So let's talk about the last question we ask every one of our guests on the Tick Bootcamp podcast. And that is going to be your husband, who is so wonderfully supportive of you during this entire journey. If he came walking into your room right after this podcast and you found that he had a tick biting him on his arm, what would you recommend that he do so he wouldn't have to go on a very challenging Lyme disease journey?
Number one, I would take the tick, put it in a Ziploc bag, and ship it off to, I think it's tick check or tick report. I would check it for co-infections. And I personally would probably treat with antibiotics. If I caught it within, I would rush it as fast. I would check every co-infection that I could. And if it did come back positive, I would put him on antibiotics. I am not 100% certain for what kind. It kind of would depend on, co-infections and where he's at, but that's how I would treat it first. I would try. And then if that didn't work, I would 100% move him straight to Venom Therapy.
Thank you for listening to the Tick Bootcamp interview with our guest, Brett Knight. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Brett Knight, please visit our Instagram page at Brett M. Knight. Second, if you enjoyed this episode of the Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share with your friends by using the social media buttons you see at the bottom of our post. Third, Tick Bootcamp has created a Tick Bite blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been shared with us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at tickbootcamp.com to view the blueprint. Please note we would appreciate any input or any improvements you would like to share with us. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify to get your automatic episode updates of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. And finally, we thank you, our community, for your comments on our past podcast episodes. Please take a minute to leave us an honest review on Apple Podcasts, on Instagram, or on our website. We make it a point to read every single one of the reviews we get. Thank you, as always, for listening.